After the meticulous correction job I did, the code is ready.
That's right. Now we have to take all of this to the machine. For this, we must make absolutely sure that both the tools and the piece are well positioned on it.
You're right. Could I ask you for a favor?
No problem, I'm listening.
Well, I was wondering if you could show me how to really load the piece.
Well, that's just what I was going to get into. Why don't we go to the machine and I'll show you there. Well, before loading the tools on our lathe, the first thing that we are going to do is to see which elements we are going to need during the entire procedure to do the job. We have the safety equipment, where we have our gloves and safety glasses. We have the measuring elements, gauges and micrometer, tool holder, and inserts that will help us to remove the material, some general tools that will enable us to mount the pieces onto the lathe, and finally, the piece to be machined.
Perfect.
As I explained, it is very important that these pieces are correctly mounted on the lathe and are well set up on our lathe. Why? Because no matter how good our code is, it is useless if we don't do this job well.
Right, it's like we saw earlier. If we don't set up the tools well, it's impossible for the machine to know how to machine the piece.
That's right. Therefore, I'm going to teach you a little recipe that I always use to not forget any of these steps.
Okay, let's see.
First of all, we obviously have to turn the lathe on. Let's press the green button, the lathe turns on. Then we have to explain to our lathe where it is positioned, for which we have to reference it. Then we're going to mount our pieces and our tools onto the lathe. And finally, we have to tell the lathe what the length of each of these pieces will be, which we're going to do through the CNC code.
Okay.
Great. With this, we have everything. Now let's look in more detail at each of these steps, okay? Let's go to the machine. Based on the list of actions that we have to take now, the first thing is to turn on the machine.
All right.
Fine.
And we're ready.
Exactly. Fine. There we go. Then, what we have to do is reference our machine. Therefore, let's put the safety equipment on because we're going to start moving our machine. Well, here we have it. Let's start moving the machine. Let's set our machine to manual. And we're going to move our machine in the X direction and in the Z direction. What follows is to load our tools. Speaking of which, did you bring the code?
What for?
Because we have defined the position of each of the tools in the code, which must be associated with our plate.
Ah, I've got everything noted down, Jorge.
Well, excellent then. Okay, so let's begin to load our tools. Tell me where we should put the roughing tool.
Roughing T01.
The roughing tool in T01. Very good. The finishing tool?
T03.
In T03. The milling tool?
In T05, the milling tool.
T05. Fine. We've reached the fourth and final step, which is to tell the CNC what the lengths of each of our tools are. What we can see on the screen is a crosstab, where we have the T values that we have already set. It is the T01, the T03, and the T05. Now I'm going to ask you to help me and pass me the values of each of the LX and the LZ lengths of the tool.
Perfect. Let's see.
Can you measure them from the lathe?
And in what units do you want them, Jorge?
Very good question. The unit should be, in this case, in millimeters because the lathe is set in millimeters. But be careful because some lathes may be set in inches.
The T01?
Yes, the T01.
55.5 for X and 6.3 for Z.
Perfect. 6.3 for Z. T03?
Yes, it's 48.8 for X and 1.2 for Z.
1.2 for Z.
Yeah. And the T05, I have 56.3 for X and 0.5 for Z.
And with this, we've loaded all the lengths of the tools.
Okay, is there anything else?
In fact, yes, there is. This gives us the lengths of the tools. Then there's a table, which is the roughing table, which defines the compensation due to the wear of each of our tools. This is a crosstab table, like we saw with the tool lengths. Ultimately, if I start to make the tool smaller because it gets worn, I have to compensate this. How do I compensate? By entering the amount that is being worn. With this, we've finished loading our tools in the CNC, and we're ready to run some tests.
So essentially what we did was identify the tools that we will use for our production process, place them in the turret according to the code we have, and load the information of the characteristic dimensions of each one in the CNC.
That's right.